Hello, good day. I hope you are having a good day. And today I am going to reiterate some things that are often misunderstood in my previous lecture video. So I will be talking now about communication and the elements of the communication process. But before that, let's define communication first. So communication is sometimes defined as the process of sending and receiving messages, and that's according to Satterwhite and Olson Sutton 2007. So by this definition itself, we can see that the communication process involves the sender, the message, and the receiver. For the second definition by Engelberg and Wynne 2008, it is stated that it is the process of using verbal and nonverbal messages to generate meaning within and across various contexts, cultures, and channels. So, in the second definition, we can see that communication process involves verbal and non-verbal messages, context, which also includes cultures and the channel. So from the first definition given and the second definition given, we can see that there are different elements of the communication process. So from the definition, we have the sender, the receiver, the message, the channel, and the context. But to also add some of the elements that are apparent in the communication process, I will show you an illustration. So here we have the source or the receiver. So both can be a source or the receiver in a certain communication process, because once the receiver will give his or her feedback, the sender who initiated the communication process will automatically become the receiver as well. So, of course, uh, the communication process may sometimes be hampered or impeded by different forms of interferences like the external noise, internal noise, and semantic noise. So, a very common example of external noise is the sounds of the vehicles passing by while the communicators are having the conversation or the communication process. So the context also is pertaining to the environment where the communication happened. Like if the receiver and the sender are having their conversation in the classroom or at the market or at the church. So that environment is the environmental context of the communication process. And there are also other types of context like social context, which refers to the relationship of the communicators. They can be couple, they can be student and teacher. So the communication will vary according to the context, because if you are talking to your peers, the language that you will be using in your communication will be intended for peers. They might be quite informal, but if you are talking to your teacher, so of course you will be using a formal language. So to really reiterate the definition of all these elements, I would like to single out each. So first, we have the sender or the receiver. So since they exchange roles as the messages and feedbacks are flowing. So it is the sender who initiates the communication process and establishes the purpose of the message. So on the other hand, the receiver is the one whom the message is intended and sent. So for example, the sender would send a message that please come to my office at 3 p.m. So the sender may be your boss. So the boss would say, please come to my office at 3 p.m. today. So that's the message. So the receiver will feedback, uh, may feedback with uh, this message is being acknowledged and I will be coming at 3 p.m. in your office. So that is the response of the receiver to the message being sent by the sender. So the boss may send the message through face to face or through email or through telephone or through text. So the way the message is being sent is already called the channel. So before going to the definition of channel, so let's have the definition of message. So it contains the information. So the information is intended to take an action. So since the boss said that please come to my office at 3 p.m., so the intention of that is to take an action. So still that is one way of giving information to the employer that he or she must come to the office at 3 p.m. So it could also be a thought of feelings. For example, uh, a man would say, I love you to a woman. So that is a feeling that the communicator expresses. So I love you there is the message, and the man is the sender, and the woman is the receiver. So the sender determines the purpose of the message, and this can be one of these three forms. So it can be to inform, to persuade, or to take an action. To inform is very common in the field of journalism or even in memorandums in a corporate setting. So to persuade also is very common in commercial advertisements. And to take an action, this is also common in the corporate world where a memorandum is informing or requesting the subordinates to appear for a meeting. So it depends to the intention imposed by the sender of the message. So let's go now to the channel or the medium. It identifies how the message is delivered. So as what I have said earlier, it could be through email or through text, through face to face, or through the telephone. So if it is in a verbal face to face communication, therefore air serves as the medium, and the message is transmitted through sound and light waves. That's why the presentation here is having some waves at the bottom for you also to be reminded that in the face-to-face communication or even in the telephone communication, there is sound waves. But in the face-to-face communication, there is sound wave and there is also light wave, because you are able to perceive the nonverbal forms of communication, which is done by both the sender and the receiver. So a channel can also be sensory, such as how somebody holds or shake hands with you, or it can also be in any other means like the use of technology or any other medium like telephone, email, voicemail, meet, video recording, and written memorandum. So it is the passageway of the message. So next, we have the feedback. Of course, this is the response of the receiver to the message being received. So once the message is being encoded by the sender, the receiver would decode the message based on his own interpretation. So the schema of the receiver will affect the way he will give a feedback. So it depends to his own orientation, language orientation. Uh, for example, if the sender is talking about engineering, and then the receiver would not be able to understand the jargons being used by the sender. Therefore, the receiver may not be able to give an appropriate feedback to the message, since the receiver is not having the same field of reference or frame of reference. So to achieve an appropriate feedback, the sender must suit the language being used in order to expect an appropriate feedback. So the language must be suited to the orientation of the receiver. So again, this is the response of the receiver to the sender upon receiving the message. So next, we have the context. This is often misunderstood. The context refers to the environment, the situation, or the condition where the communication occurs, and it really affects the communicators in receiving or in giving the messages. So example of the environment is the classroom or the park. It refers to the physical environment where the communication happens. So if the context is having a noise, so it will really affect even the temperature of the physical context or the environment would matter in the communication process. So if it's not well ventilated, so the tendency is that the communicators would not be at ease while communicating. So it also refers to the situation. For example, if you are in a computer class and your teacher would say, please uh, pick up the mouse. So of course, since you are in a computer class, it is understood that the mouse that the teacher said refers to the hardware mouse or the accessory of the computer. But if you are in the forest and someone would say, wow, there is a mouse there. So probably, since the physical context is a forest, the mouse might be the scavenger mouse. So the context would really matter in the communication process and in the interpretation of the messages or the decoding of the messages. So it can also be a social context, as what I have said earlier, that that refers to the relationship of the communicators. They can be a couple. Some informal languages might not be as offensive to uh, might not be offensive to some couples, but it may be offensive to people who are strangers to you. So if, for example, you will say that your peer is buang, so your peer might not be offended with that term buang. You refer to him. But if you say buang to your teacher might be offended with that term. So the social context will really matter. So you have to consider the context in the communication process. So this way of communicating may be applicable to the context A, but not be applicable to the context B. So according to Roebuck 2006, environment can include the room temperature, lighting, furniture, timing, as well as the climate and the relationships that exist between the communicator. Yes, even the timing would matter because there are holy hours, for example, 1, 2, 3. Your receivers of the message may not be as interested as they were during 8 to 12 noon, because 1 to 3 is known to be holy hour, or most of the people are feeling sleepy. So 11 to 12, the time from 11 a.m. to 12 noon is sometimes also a risky hour in sending a message, especially in a one-way communication process, because the receiver might be at the stage of hunger. So because it is about to take it is almost time for them to take their lunch. So the temperature will matter. So I guess communication will be more effective if the room is well ventilated, unlike when they are sweating while communicating. And then the lighting furniture is are the furnitures not implying a scary environment, timing, as well as the climate, and again the relationship. So if you have observed, you communicate differently to your peers and to the professionals. So next, we have the interference or the noise. This is anything that will impede or hamper the communication process. So it is anything that hinders the shared understanding, and generally noise is classified as external, internal, and semantic. So these are also often misunderstood. So if you say external, it means that it is associated with the physical environment or any noise that you can hear around while you are having the communication process. So it originates from the communicator's surroundings or environment. Some examples of this noise are boisterous laughter, the video case sessions of your neighborhood, and the sound of a fast moving vehicle, or even the construction workers who are grilling. So That is an example of external noise. So if you are having your virtual classes and then your siblings are playing and they are shouting, so that may hamper your that may hamper the message or the flow of the communication process. So even if the during the virtual classes, even if the teacher is speaking clearly or talking clearly to you, if your environment as the receiver is noisy, so the tendency is that you will not be able to understand what the teacher just just instructed, or you will not understand the instructions or the discussions of the teacher because your environment is noisy. So for you to be able to receive the message efficiently, so avoid this kind of noise. You have to go somewhere else where there is a minimal noise. So another is internal noise. Do not confuse this with external noise, because internal is anything that is self-related to your attitudes, your opinions, your beliefs that may hamper the effective sending and receiving of the message. So examples of this can include any physiological state like hunger and pain out of illness, and psychological thoughts like worry, fear, anxiety, disappointment, and prejudice. So if you are having an ill feeling, if or illness or psychological thoughts like you are insecure of the person talking to you, the tendency is that you will not be able to focus on decoding the meaning of the sent message to you, because you are disturbed internally. So there is an internal disturbance in you. Even if you are hungry, so there's still a tendency that you will not be able to focus on the delivered message. So for example, in a gathering where there is a speaker, so and there were no snacks given, then it's almost 12 noon. So the tendency is that you will feel uh, you will feel hungry, and that you will lose your focus. So of course, who would want to listen to that speaker? Nobody. So no one would listen to that speaker if the audience are all hungry. So that's why there is really a need for snacks for a long session of talks. So um, sometimes before you communicate to your receiver, we also need to check or to ask the to ask to ask whether your receiver is in good disposition for your conversation, or is in good disposition to receive your message. So that's why we often start our conversation with how are you, or are you doing well today? So that's one way of setting the mood for the conversation. So that after greeting each other, after asking about the disposition of each other, so there is already a good context for the conversation, and the internal noise may be minimized. So we can expect a greater probability of efficiency in the communication process. So next we have the semantic noise. So semantic noise is referring to the difference, no? Difference in meanings, or the communicators or who are having the conversation does not do not have shared meanings of the language. So the tendency is that they will not be able to understand each other. So it gets in the way when the sender and the receiver do not share the same meanings for their verbal or non-verbal signals. So examples are jargons. So let me give you an example of this. So there are a lot of lexical items in the Cebuano Visayan that do not share the same meaning in the Filipino language or the Tagalog language. So like the langgam in Cebuano Visayan is a bird, and while the langgam in Luzon is an ant. So another is uh, what there are a lot of terms. So even there are also a lot of lexical items in the Visayan community, like in the Hiligaynon, Cebuano Visayan, and the Waray-Waray Visayan. So even in the three Visayan communities, there are a lot of lexical items or terminologies that do not share the same meaning. So if you are communicating with that person who does not share the same meaning with you, there is a tendency that your communication will be hampered. And that impediment is called a semantic noise. So do not confuse semantic noise with internal noise and external noise. So external is something you can see or you can hear rather in your surroundings, while internal is something that you can feel inside you or inside the person you are communicating with. And semantic noise is in the language or in the meanings of your language. So next is the frame of reference. This refers to the field of experience of the communicators. So for example, the field of experience of the sender is in the field of of medicine, and the receiver is so experienced in the field of law. So there is a tendency that their jargons will vary, and there is a tendency that the communication will be hampered by semantic noise, since there are lexical items of i- there are lexical items in the field of law that might not be understood by the person who is experienced in the field of medicine. And there might also be some lexical items that may not be understood by the lawyer in the field of medicine. So frame of reference will also matter in the communication process. So it brings into their interactions their own value system or culture, preferences, worldviews, the self-concept, which is really important in the interpretation of meaning, expectations, and experiences. So these factors make every communicator unique. So this is quite similar to the context, and this is even under context if you will try to see. So nevertheless, when commonalities are identified, this will help establish a starting point for communication. So you have to see what is common in you, even if you are not in the same field of experience. Just try to see on your commonalities, so for you to start a conversation. So perhaps the person who is experienced in law, in the field of law, and the person who is experienced in the field of medicine may see something in common in them, like in their hobbies. For example, maybe this person who is experienced in law loves playing volleyball, and the same with the person who is experienced in medicine. So in that case, so that they will be able to communicate. They may talk about volleyball instead of talking about their specialization or field of experience, for them to have a good communication process. So nevertheless, so frame of reference is also termed as field of experience. So I guess field of experience is more understandable compared to frame of reference. Okay, so that's all. And thank you. If you have some questions, please comment below.